Is that your chair?
Yep.
You broke it, huh?
Yeah, I broke it, I gotta pay for it now, yes.
We'll have to repair it for your.
No.
He's got to open the meeting first, doesn't
Yeah.
he? Need your gavel?
Okay, today we're gonna have a work session on the budget. This is not a budget hearing, it's just a work session.
Work session, yeah.
So we'll go over the numbers, and with that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Okay. I'm Dave Papandrew, Treasurer Controller, and this is Ruth Cook. She's Financial Analyst. We'll probably be doing most of the presentation, but we will call upon a number of our departmental managers to chime in on various areas. So this is the 2016 budget. We aren't specifically going to talk about rates today, but we'll talk kind of around rates and some of the challenges that are presented by the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So, when we talk in terms of the budget, we're talking about a financial model that is, of course, nonprofit. We recover our costs through rates, and currently we are still using a cash basis budget, which we anticipate changing next year back to an accrual basis budget, but we are still using cash basis at the current time. One of our basic objectives in the strategic plan is rate stability, and it is a strategic objective. And what we have defined rate stability as meaning smaller and more frequent rate increases. In other words, trying to level out any rate increases on a basically annual basis, and not going for 2 or 3 years and hitting with a large rate increase. Rather smaller and more frequent. We have some challenges that we have addressed, and we will address later in the slideshow, having to do with rates. So I said that we recover our costs through rates. Our basic costs, our primary costs, are purchase power, personnel costs, capital, materials and supplies, taxes, debt service, and conservation. Now, what I have done, this slide, that's the next slide. That's basically the same pie, but kind of cut up in different ways. This pie shows the cost components that I just described. Purchase power, personnel costs, materials and supplies, taxes, debt service, conservation, and capital that is purchased through rates. We typically purchase capital through rates, a portion of it through rates, and a portion of it through debt service as needed.
So those first two items are like 74%?
Yeah, the first two items you'll notice are almost 75%. So really that has a big impact. That's the reason I broke it down this way, just to show that those two components. Now, when I say personnel costs, that includes payroll taxes, benefits, medical insurance, retirement system contributions, and basically L&I, labor and industries taxes, or payments. You can't really call them taxes, the labor and industries. So the typical way of looking at this is basically the categories that you would see in financial statements, and that would be purchase power, operations and maintenance, which you can see the two of them together add up to about 80%. So that means that the other components of operations and maintenance are about 6%. But the other thing to look at is that a portion of the personnel costs get capitalized. When we do additions to the system that are capital additions, sometimes our own crew does a lot of the work, and so a portion of the personnel costs get capitalized.
Where does renewables, does that fit in conservation, or does it?
Renewables, I believe we just have in the purchase power number.
Purchase power?
Yeah.
Because that's Rex.
Yeah, I'll get into that when I get down into the details. This, when I said challenges, this is the challenge that we have ahead of us. Looking back at the last 5 years, including a projected number for 2015, which is basically the actual through September, and then a projection for the last 3 months. You can see that our net power costs, and I've defined net power costs, it's kind of my own definition, but net power costs is the cost to purchase power, the cost of RECs, renewable energy credits. Is it renewable energy credits? Yeah, I always get that wrong. And the net cost of conservation, that is what we pay for conservation, net of what Bonneville rebates us in conservation. You can see those expenses have risen significantly since 2011. Our personnel costs have risen just about at a different rate, but ending up at about the same place.
So these breakpoints in here are Bonneville's increases.
Actually those breakpoints are on our rate revenues. That's our actual rate revenues for that 5-year period. And you can see that has remained pretty flat. It's what, about a 2%, 2.5%, maybe possibly 3% increase in the last 5 years, even with a 3% rate increase in 2012, a 3% rate increase in 2013, a 3.5% in 14 and 15. And the reason for that, of course, is that purple one down at the bottom, and that is, well, because of a combination of weather and conservation, we are selling we're selling less of our product. We're selling fewer kilowatt hours, and so therefore, even though we're raising rates, revenues aren't going up at the same rate. So that is the challenge that I talked about.
So a couple of mild winters, which could be climate change or whatever.
A couple mild winters, and I think we'll get into a little bit later.
Conservation, of course.
John put together a pretty good summary of the last several years, and I'll let him talk about that when we get to it. But yeah, that's the problem.
Good.
So rate pressures, current, power costs, personnel costs, lack of growth in sales, primarily weather related. And in the future, power costs, conservation and renewable cost, and you'll see when we pass out these long-range projections, you'll see that the cost of RECs are going up significantly in the next several years. That tends to be an issue. And the uncertainty in the growth in sales, basically
The economy.
weather related, and I say legal compliance. Legal compliance basically means I-937. Because of the conservation and renewable mandates, we have reduced growth in our sales. Is that supposed to be like that?
No.
Oh, we're doing that. This is, I think I'll put the whole thing there, because these are the things that John put together, and I want to give him an opportunity to explain some of this. John, I changed a little bit in that, but pretty much it's what you gave me.
Yes, basically, we'd like to point out that ever since 2011, there's been a step down in consecutive years in total heating degree days. The first two were relatively mild, about 200 heating degree days. But last year and this year, extrapolated to the end of the year, is rather dramatic. In 2014, at 5375 heating degree days, is about 1.7 degrees warmer than what the typical has been over the last the previous 10, 15 years. And this year, it is almost 3.3 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than that same average.
Hey, John, you might explain what heating degree days means, since we have so
Okay,
many.
well, the heating degree days is basically, they assume that for each day and day equivalent at below 65 degrees Fahrenheit is a heating degree day. So 1 degree for 24 hours or 64 degrees Fahrenheit is 1 heating degree day. Now, if you're down around 20 degrees, that's 45 degrees off of the 65 degree nominal for heating degree days. So it would be 45 heating degree days averaged to the year. 6,000 is typically what we see in Clallam County. If you go through the whole year, and you take the average temperature difference from 65 degrees, it generally sums to about 6,000. Now, for practical purposes, we don't see much of a difference in usage until you get down to about 55 degrees, but at the 20 or 30 degree, 40 degree level, it's fairly linear. So it's possible to do an analysis based on heating degree day equivalents throughout the entire year. But, for example, in 2014, we had 5375 heating degree days, which is about 1.7 degrees warmer than normal. In 2015, if we project the current through the end of the year, it's 4793 heating degree days, and I don't think there's anything on record that warm before. Our records go back real good, real detailed to about 2002. The last 2 years, this year and 2014, are considerably warmer than any year back to 2002. So basically, and maybe we'll get into it a little bit later, but if you adjust the usage to a normal year, our kilowatt hours sold would be relatively flat. But as you saw on Dave's chart, it's dipped almost 11% from a peak in 2011.
Okay, thanks, John.
Oh, and go back, and this is,
Pardon me?
on this one right here, 1 heating degree days is equivalent to 61,000 kilowatt hours for the system and about $4,000 revenue. When we talk about a difference between, let's say, a 6,000 heating degree days to 4793, that's 1,200. 1,200 times 4,000 is a substantial reduction in revenue.
Yeah, that's I would think nearly $5 million.
Very close to
Yeah,
that, yes.
yeah. And see, well, according to, I didn't put those numbers here, but basically, I think according to your calculations, based on normal heating degree days and where we are this year, we were like $4.8 million under revenue.
Correct.
I think based on the budget that we did last year, we were about close to $3 million under revenue for this year.
Okay, and based on the, looking at it, and Fred's also looking at this a little bit in more detail based on rate classes, but it's looking like since the recession and recovery, we're experiencing about a 0.5% in meter growth. That's just, you know, the number of customers, about 0.5% annually. And let's see, most of the rest of that's yours, I guess, day to day.
Yeah. So, the challenges that we talked about, stable rates, capital financing, maintenance of reserves, at or above our target of 16 to 19 million. That's the target that we had a cost of service study done last year, and that's about where the consultant said that we should be. And that equates to 3 to 4 months in operating costs. The 3 to 4 months in operating costs plus debt service should be maintained in reserves just in case. I mean, due to the fact that we're kind of isolated out here, if we had a big major problem, it might take, you know, some time to get whatever supplies and so forth that we would need. And I mean, there's all kinds of components that go into that calculation, but that is about where they said we should be. Of course, according to our any bonds that we have, electric system bonds, we need to maintain a debt service coverage ratio at a certain level. I believe that level for the bond covenant is 1.25, and I think we have set a target of 1.4, and we're significantly above that. We're well in the 3 and 4.0 areas, but you have to constantly be looking at that so that it doesn't get below the covenant.
Can we go back to the previous slide? I think
Sure.
the last couple of bullets.
Okay. Oh, this one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So these are the assumptions that I'm going to pass out a projection that we did in a minute, and these are the assumptions that we made in the projection, and that is that we have rate increases from BPA of approximately 8% in 2017, 2019. We have an increase according to our strategic plan. We have decided internally to try to keep our O&M costs at an increase of 2% or less annually. That's a real challenge. The rate finance capital, conservation per I-937 is dependent on our CPA, and that's not a certified public accountant. That's a conservation potential assessment.
What you were taking responsibility.
I wouldn't take responsibility, no. And here's the important thing I think to take away from this, and that is that our projected rate increases are going to be highly dependent on rate design in the future. One of the things that the cost of service study and rate design that we had last year indicated is that our monthly charge should be around $33 per customer, and we are currently at approximately 25. I would contend that in order to kind of guarantee the revenue that we need for the next year, that we're going to have to raise our base charge to start heading in the direction of the 33. And I have some ideas on that, which we'll talk about at a different session, but this just kind of shows you the circumstances.
What are the other PUDs
Well, you know, I was just talking to Rich Bauer at Lewis last week at the PERMS meeting. I saw you there, Hugh, but you didn't say anything, so.
Well, I was at the other end
You're
of the
the
table.
Anyway, and he said, and they are approximately the same size we are. Their kilowatt hour sales are down. Their costs, of course, are going up. And the only way to get kind of guaranteed revenue is to increase your base rate. What I didn't ask him is what theirs is. I can look it up, but they're going through exactly the same thing. And I'm
Most
sure
of
if
the
I
other-
talk to
Most of the other utilities are going to the range, and over the last 5 years, they've all been putting a lot of their increases into the base rate.
Yeah.
So they're all at, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of them are moving towards the $25, $30 ranges.
And we heard from Bonneville last week, they're facing the same challenge.
Mhm.
And now they already have a basic customer charge for us that's $1 million a month.
Oh.
And so in their newer contracts, they went to a high customer charge, fixed
Mhm.
charge to
Mhm.
help stabilize their
Yeah.
rates.
A utility like Okanagan, I've mentioned this before, is when they did their cost of service, it was like $80 basic charge.
Yeah.
So,
But they're spread out too. They've got a lot more distribution and customers per mile, fewer customers per mile. John, when you looked at the, well, the numbers for the disparity in temperatures or heating degree days, did you happen to look at the one end of the county and the other from delivery points?
You know, I looked at the percentage that was delivered at each of the PPA points of delivery. Unfortunately, the only good historical record for temperature is associated with the airport at Port Angeles. So we do now have SCADA where we have local readings, but that's only over the last couple, 1, 2, 3, 4 years. So when we do the heating degree days, it's based entirely on the airport reads at Port Angeles, which are the only ones that are reliable enough to do that.
So if you did it in Squell, that'd be even worse. Well,
Perhaps.
sunny Squell,
Perhaps. I think the errors even out over time, you know, over the course of the year.
But I think even talking to the people out in Forks, it's been pretty warm out there this last year, so.
Of course,
I
sunny
think it
weather.
impacts the whole county pretty.
I just, I guess, was kind of wondering if the change was different, the percentage of change was different from one end to the other.
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, the proportion of power that we supply from Happy Valley, the eastern feeder out of Port Angeles, and the central feeder out of Port Angeles, they have slightly increased as a proportion of our total deliveries. Out west, even before the closing of the mills, there's been a slight decline. Meaning, it went, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it went a couple percentage lower. I think the peak was, peak demand, in terms of demand, went from 34 megawatts 4 or 5 years ago to more like 31 to 32 megawatts even before the mills closed. So most of our, it's been a decline out west and a little bit more of an increase in the other areas when we talk about that. 0.5% growth. Maybe in Port Angeles and Happy Valley, more like 0.6, 0.7. When you look at out west, it's probably negative. But they all total to about 0.5 or 0.5%.
It would be interesting if we could get a correlation between the amount of activity in our conservation program and the growth rates or, non-growth rates. And see if that, there is a correlation there. The weather-related tend to be warmer than spring. You know, when you look at it on an annual basis, daily basis, just the average temperature, I think, is a little higher for Forks than it is for swimming. That's, I think, their relationship to the water.
Well, no, that's absolutely true. And with our skater, we'll be able to get more detailed temperature information. It won't go back very far. It only goes back a couple, 3 years. So we'll have that information on board, but we also have a tremendous difference between even one substation like Olympic that may be feeding up near the Straits where it's fairly warm and also fills up, goes to the end of Lost Mountain where you're in the foothills, it might be 15 degrees cooler. So there's tremendous temperature variations even on the eastern side of the territory. Same thing with Near Bay Forks, South Forks. We don't have quite that fine of analysis yet. We're just looking at in total. So that in total, the actual load growth is very flat.
John, you mentioned the mill closures in your slide from previous years. That impacted revenue as well.
I believe the mill closing, both mills closing out there is about 1.2% to 1.3% energy, or revenue loss.
Revenue.
Now, it's interesting in the general manager's meeting, not all the utilities got hit from a weather standpoint. Some ones out eastern is more normal. They haven't had a big impact from the weather, so it varies a lot over the state. The ones on the west did get impacted pretty good. I know Skamania was telling me he got hit real hard from the weatherization thing.
And one thing I would add, grow operations, there are some online now, and that has probably added about 1/3 of 1% to revenue. And even out west, there's some large grow operations planned or permitted and going through the Liquor Control Board. If they come online, each one of those might add 0.5% to the whole gross revenue for the whole district. We just haven't seen them come online at that level yet. But they're permitted and they might have it. They may be more than the lost mills.
Ken? That's a mixed blessing.
I know.
Right now, the amount that's permitted, if they're fully built out, is equivalent to about 3% of the gross revenues.
Wow.
If they're built out. We haven't seen them built out yet.
What about Pacific? They had a number of grow operations.
They didn't pan out either.
Really?
No.
Oh, that's good.
Not at the rate they thought they would.
Yeah.
So now, a couple other things that did you have something else to say, Jim? A couple other things that I would point out would be, and Linda can probably help me with this, but I believe that base rates create about a little over $8.7 million of our $50-some million in revenue. Is that about right?
I couldn't tell you.
You couldn't tell me? Okay, that's, take my word for it then. It's around 8.7 million, I believe. And the other thing, the other challenge again is if we were to raise the base rate, of course, in a lot of cases, some of the people that are impacted are the lower income and lower users. And we might as well talk about that. And I'll let Sean tell us the fact that I believe our senior and low income discounts go directly to that base rate, don't they? I mean, isn't that the way they're designed? And we certainly can.
It's only on the electric, nothing on waters.
No, I'm just talking electric.
Yeah, it goes straight to the base rate.
Yeah, so we can, mitigate part of the problem with lower income and senior low income people by, I guess, tweaking that program, those programs too. Okay. Uh-oh, what happened? There it is. think we've already talked about this. Okay, so we've got a couple handouts. These things just do not project well up on the screen, so.
I'll let you do it. Okay, so this is one.
On this, but it's a historic look for the last 5 years of what our budget versus actual has been. Again, the really important thing to look at is the actual, not the budget, but you can see that our rate revenue has remained pretty flat for that period. Above each one of those columns, you can see where we had rate increases. We went from 50,126,000 in 2011 to 50,630,000 in 2012, even with a 3% rate increase. I'm sure, well, you can see the difference between what was projected. The budget for 2011 and 2012 was nearly $3 million more, and yet we only went up about 500,000. Then 2013, our revenues actually went down a bit, even though we had projected them to be going up about 2 million more. 2014, revenues went up just about 300,000, and we had projected them to go up another 2 million at a 3.5% rate increase. So it's pretty graphic when you look at those. As you see, 2015, we projected revenues would go up about $1.5 million, and they actually went down. So it's pretty graphic when you look at it that way. Really, the only two components of our costs that are variable, that basically go up and down in direct proportion to the rate revenue, would be our taxes that are based on revenues for the most part, and our power costs, which of course you can't sell it if you don't buy it, and vice versa. So anyway, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but I just wanted to show that that's been the history of the PUD for the last 5 years. Now, more importantly, let's look at the next one. The long one, or the vertical one. The vertical one. The next one's here. And this is a projection for the next 5 years. It shows the budget and the estimated actual for 2015, and then it shows the projection for 16 through 20. Again, going back to the assumptions that I showed earlier, these show and I'm going to use the word theoretical, a theoretical increase in rates of 3.5% each year. And that's theoretical because that would really depend on weather. So I don't think you can raise rates enough 3.5% wise through fixed charge to guarantee you that you get the revenue, even if you have a reduction in the sales.
So
So
these projections, that's based on warmer winters, or
it's
the trend
it's
we've been
based
seeing?
on the current forecast that we get from BPA as far as how much they're selling us in kilowatts.
Is it based on flat revenue or not?
No, there's 3.5% rate.
There's 3.5% rate increase.
No, I'm sorry.
And it's just for purposes of the analysis. It's just based on 3.5% rate increase, using as a base, the current projected usage that is given to us by BPA.
Right, which is a 0.6% average annual growth rate in total load.
There you go, yeah.
But Bonneville gave a report down at Energy Northwest that included, they predict a warmer winter coming up.
Mhm.
So I guess my question is, do we factor that in here, or?
Well, I factored it in when I did the current year. I basically took the last
Okay,
5
that's-
years.
That's being typical.
Yeah, I took the last 5 years and averaged them
Okay.
and assumed that that's where we would be.
So
Right.
it's in there, the trends in
Yeah,
there.
it is.
Well, the typical load growth forecast that we work on with Bonneville is based on normal weather.
Yeah.
So, as we saw earlier, the last 4 or 5 years have been warmer than
Warmer than normal.
historical normal.
That's the new normal. Yeah.
So, anyways, if we look at 2016, and we see that with the budgets that we will present today, we will be using about $671,000 of our, you go about halfway down the page where it says surplus deficiency of funds under net revenue requirement. You see that we're using about $671,000 of our reserves in the next year. But then if you go under reserve analysis, which is about 2/3 of the way down the page, that takes us from what our beginning cash balance at the beginning of 2016 is projected to be, and then using part of our reserves, takes us down to 19.9 million, which is still within that range of 16 to 19 million in reserves. But if you go across the page and look at the following 3-4 years, you see that we continue to use reserves with just a 3.5% rate increase. So we have challenges, let's put it that way. Really, the only answer to that is, there's a couple answers. One would be growth. You know, if we had growth, we probably would be better off, or to cut costs. I mean, that's basically where we are. So, that, I don't want to spend too much time on those things because people's eyes tend to glaze over when you get into the details, but they
Well, they're
certainly.
projections too. So
They are projections, yes, definitely. You know, I always tell people, my name is David, and I'm not a prophet like the original. Okay, so let's start looking. Did we go forward there?
Yeah.
How did that happen? Okay. So, into the details of the budget. I think I used about the same format as we used last year, didn't we?
Pretty
Yeah.
close.
We used the same format as we did last year. The first column on the left is the proposed budget for 2016, and that basically should tie to the projection that I just showed you on the long vertical page. Then we compare that with 2015, the budget for 2015, and then any change, an increase or decrease. And then the estimated actual. So you can see in 2015, again, I mean, I keep pounding on this, but it is something that we need to pound on, that we had projected revenues of 54.7 million, and the revenues are coming in at just 51.1, so about $3.5 million. And I think what John said earlier, if you just looked at that in terms of normal heating days versus what our actual was, it would have actually been about $4.8 million less. So let's start looking at some of the costs by department. Now you're gonna see in a lot of cases here, personnel costs going up. A huge component of that, well, there's two reasons for that in certain departments. One is that we changed the method of allocating the healthcare costs. I don't know if Ruth wants to describe that, if you'd like to describe how we changed that.
Well, basically what we're doing now is taking the total cost, and instead of looking at the individual plans chosen by employees in each of the departments, we've taken the whole cost, divided it by the total number of employees, and then just allocated it based on the number of employees per department. So rather than getting very specific and looking at the plan that an employee has chosen, whether it be single, family, so forth, it just didn't make sense to do it that way. And instead, we just looked at number of employees per department and allocated costs that way.
So it could have created a bit of a change from 2015 to 2016 just because of the allocation. But the big change is, and I'll let Jamie talk about this, the cost of healthcare. I mean, it's gone up, what, about 9% in the last 5 years?
Yeah, been averaging about 9% every year increase.
So that presents a big challenge.
So this allocation will show up if you look at each department.
Yeah, and there will probably be some that'll be a little bit affected in one way and some that will be affected the other way.
That's included in the personnel costs.
That is. The other thing that increased personnel costs is, I believe as of July 1st of 2015, our PERS contribution, both employee and employer, went up significantly. I can't tell you the exact percentage, but I think it went from like 8.9 to 11 something.
Yeah.
Something
It
like
was
that.
9.1 to 11.
Yeah, 9.1 to
Something.
11.
Because PERS is underfunded, or?
You
I'm
know,
not sure. They
it's
had-
not because it's underfunded, well,
Must be.
it has to do with their earning potential. I mean, obviously,
Well, that's right.
you know, with interest rates significantly down now, you know, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, PERS made a big mistake back in the early 2000s. There were a couple years there that I know of that they didn't withhold anything from the employees, or next to nothing from the employees' pay, because they were earning so much in the stock market and interest rates and so forth. They were earning so much that it didn't make sense. Well, they didn't think it made sense, but in my opinion, they should have continued on a steady rate and built those reserves for the future. I don't think they anticipated the, 2008 until now. I mean, interest rates have been next to nothing. And I think they probably have backed down a little bit from some of their stock purchases, just simply because they were afraid that the market was going to be too volatile. So I do have to say that the retirement system in the state of Washington is reasonably well funded and reasonably well managed. We probably will not have issues like they have in a lot of the places in California, in Detroit, and some of the places around the country. some of the states I know too are having major issues. Now, the other thing that we have to deal with, and has nothing to do with our budget necessarily, but this coming year, we're gonna be required to put the liability on our books. In the past, we have never been required to do that, but we will be required to do that in the future. So that will take some significant calculations on the accounting end of things, along with some actuarial studies that we'll have to get from the state retirement program. So I think as we look at all of these various departmental budgets, we don't see, a whole lot of major swings. This is the commissioners. I think sometime, my very first response when I see something like the fact that the budget for travel and training was 25,000 and the estimated actual is going to be about 32. My first response to that is that somebody did a poor job of budgeting, and I have to say that that was me. So I tried to be a little bit more realistic in the next year. Human resources, I could let Jamie talk about that. I don't know whether there's anything significant in there. We have, in the last couple of years, spent a little more money than I would like to on legal services, but unfortunately, those things happen.
Managing risk.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, actually, our budget for 2016 is down from our budget in 2015. There's a couple reasons for that. One of which is that they have a shared employee with Larry, actually, and I think she, Leslie, will be spending more time in Larry's department this coming year than she was budgeted for in the past.
Yeah, I think with the first year for being in that position, it's more of a 50-50 split than we anticipated.
So anybody that needs to chime in at any time, go right ahead. And if you guys have questions, please ask. I don't mean to gloss over things, but I also don't want to bore you.
We do have an increase in consulting costs for 2016, partially due to the healthcare. I'd like to bring in a consultant to do an audit on our healthcare plan and see where expenses are going and maybe where we can make some changes with it. To help mitigate, we also have the ACA that's impacting us.
Yeah.
The Affordable Care Act, and would like to look at evaluating that before we potentially get hit with excise tax in 2018.
That's the Cadillac.
That's the Cadillac tax. The other thing is that the Affordable Care Act is creating a significant amount of reporting requirements for both for HR and for payroll. You will get a form 1095 C? I think C? I'm not good with forms, but everybody will get that this year, and what it does is basically we're required to report that we provided or offered, in some cases, insurance to everybody and to their dependents if they were qualified, eligible. So, yes, sir.
Who's gonna pay the Cadillac plan, the taxes on that?
Who's gonna pay it?
Is it the employees or the employer?
We're hoping that we can avoid it, and that's what Jamie's talking about. That doesn't come till 2018, as I recall.
2018.
And we're trying to make some moves now so that we can either eliminate minimize or mitigate those costs, and so therefore not have to pay them.
And there's an effort to repeal that part.
Well, yeah, it, depends who gets elected the next year.
And we're going into negotiations first of the year. But what other utilities have done is to have a reopener every year, so that as we learn more and we know where we are, we can negotiate it. So we probably won't do a whole lot in this coming spring, but we'll have a reopener so we can look at it the following year.
How do we bring that Cadillac plan down? I mean.
That would be one way. I'll let Jamie, she
Yeah.
deals with that a lot more
I
than I
think
do.
there's even a lot of negotiating, there's a lot of stuff that could probably be done on the administrative side that employees may not be impacted, so negotiating our prescription costs and those plans.
I mean, by cutting the cost down, is that what?
By
No.
managing them.
By managing
By
them.
managing them better.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, so that's what we'll evaluate during 16 to see if we can do something that doesn't create an impact to the employees.
You know, a
And
lot
we'll
of.
bring that forward to you when the time comes.
Yeah, when the time comes. A lot of people, you know, in perms,
Right.
we basically all have our own plans.
Right,
And-
exactly, right.
And
You
we
pay-
have one of the best, I have to say.
Is that-
Yeah, and a lot of the people are, you know, basically requiring their employees to do things like the mail order drugs and those kinds of things because they can get better deals on those rather than just, I mean, ours are pretty much, you know, whatever drugs you get as long as they are qualified to.
I mean, we'll look at cutting costs and,
Sure.
and doing better that way, and
But
we'll
is
see
it
we'll see what comes out of it.
Prescription, or is it, I mean,
Yeah,
I see
prescription.
all this stuff at perms, and we have a extensive plan, but 80% of it is healthcare costs.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So
how do you
there's-
change that?
There's an education, you know, portion to the employees. There's also resources out there to negotiate costs with providers, that we've never really ventured out with perms. So there's a lot of creative ideas, and I think between seeing these costs and then with ACA, we just need to address it in
Who'd
2016.
negotiate with the providers? Would it be us or perms?
No, perms, sometimes, you know, your administrators can do that. Just some different avenues that we've never had to do in the past. But I think us and the other utilities that are part of that pool are running in, everybody's running into the same thing, high healthcare costs, excise
Oh, yeah,
tax.
every year,
and
I mean, I just looked at it
non-revenue.
last week, and it's just amazing how
Yeah.
these costs are going up every year.
Yeah.
Yep. So we have about 3 years to, you know, make some changes, and we're looking at those changes. Okay, administration, which basically is, I think, my department, and isn't it?
Mhm.
And we didn't add any employees. Well, did we? Did we put the auditor back in? I think we
Oh,
put the auditor back in.
the auditor never
Last
left.
year, it never left?
It never left.
Oh,
It's
okay.
still here.
Okay.
I like that
So,
it's
so a
legit.
good portion of
Yeah.
that is healthcare costs and PERS costs. Taxes, of course, are, direct relationship to sales. Debt service is.
Personnel costs went up almost 100,000.
Yeah.
That's a full-time auditor. Last year was just a half-time.
Oh, that,
Oh.
well, see, you didn't tell me that.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Details.
yeah, so, anyway. And right now, I think we've kept our insurance at the same level. We don't know yet what those are gonna be, but there's certainly a chance that those are gonna go up also. And that's basically payments to perms.
What's included in the contractual services?
Contractual services, you know,
Cost of service.
We're
no,
doing some
no,
great
well,
studies.
no, you know, I'm going to say that has to do with building maintenance, landscape maintenance, among other things. And again, this is the budget system that I inherited, and my intention when and if we change software programs is to change some of these things that have been the same for years and put them more, for instance, to me, building maintenance belongs with facilities. I have no idea why that ended up in this department.
Yeah, you're right.
Insurance,
But
property
this
insurance.
year, Dave, though, was not the cost of service in the.
It probably was, it probably was. Also,
That's something that can be reduced next year.
yes. Also, probably audit fees. So there's
It's
a
a
number of
range.
things. They might be in
Yeah.
consulting.
Yeah.
But again, those were things that administrative utilities and telephone, I have no idea, again, how that ended up in this department. But it is something that I am looking at changing when we implement new software. We will have kind of a department redistribution of costs so that they end up more in the area of the person that actually can manage them.
So what you're doing now, any contractual services, all of it's dumped into that?
Everything that
Rather
has.
than by department?
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
that needs to go.
Well, we do have it for each department. too.
We do, but there's a lot of stuff that, typically does not belong, I don't think, in,
Yeah.
finance and accounting, or just basically finance.
Right.
Accounting, now, this is the one area that we actually do have an additional employee, for a couple reasons. One is that, all indications are that Gail is retiring at the end of next year, so we will have to replace her. The other thing is that we are looking very hard at the possibility of changing software, and we will need somebody to dedicate probably half of their time to that process. And so we figured that the addition of an accountant will be kind of half succession planning and half software implementation. Thanks for, I couldn't come up with a word. Thank you. Customer service, I think primarily, Sean, you can talk to that. I think that primarily a lot of that is medical costs.
Yeah, and then I think we budgeted 3% for the new contract, and
Yeah.
medical, that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we went from one part-time to one full-time in one of our
Yeah.
people, but
Yeah.
that probably wouldn't have that significant of an impact.
Do we have the same number of customer service people in the new office as we do on all these other offices? Okay.
Yeah.
We will,
To
we
start
will.
with, we have the satellite offices in addition to the main office.
Where's the satellite offices?
One's at Country Air in Port Angeles, and the one's in Co-op and Squim, and we're looking at just one person in each of those offices to start with.
But those are people that are already working for us. We're not adding any people.
Okay.
We're not adding any, we're not subtracting any at this point, so we just reallocated.
We're gonna see how it goes.
So you have a retirement, certain people, you hire replacement, and there's some overlap, is that what you're?
In accounting,
Yeah, the previous one.
we haven't, I don't think, done that in really any other departments that I know of.
Makes more sense.
No, the team that Dave will be heading up for NISC will consist of someone from accounting, someone from engineering, someone from billing, a few others, a few other departments anyway, and none of them except accounting, we were looking at having a kind of a, I
An
don't call
addition,
it
yeah.
duplication, but addition.
Yeah, because, I mean, basically, the major impact of the new software is gonna be in accounting. And there's a lot of things that we will have to do to get to where we need to be. Meter reading, again, I'll let Linda speak to this, but I believe a good portion of the increase in personnel costs had to do with the medical allocation.
100,000? It's about 10, well, it's about 10%, yes, you're right.
Yeah, it's not all, remember, it's not all because of the increase in healthcare costs, it's partially due to allocation from
Yeah,
other
You
departments.
know, they're all union members, so
Yeah.
whatever they.
Yeah, whatever the union does is what we have to deal with. Okay.
We're looking at any automated meter reading?
We're looking at all that now, yeah. And we're
We're-
looking at, in the future, looking over the next 5 years or so.
We are looking at that.
We're,
Oh, yeah.
I'm in the process right now of preparing an RFP for a feasibility study to actually come up with some alternatives as to where we need to go as far as our metering. Whether we want to go to automated, partial automated, continue it the same, do some of the other things that we're already doing, so.
Well, whatever, it's gonna be a long-term phase.
It will be
As we looked at that cost before.
Yeah,
You know,
Mason 3's going with a total AMI system. We're not looking at that. We're looking at evaluating different systems. We're looking
Oh,
at
okay.
phasing things in slowly if we do something. So that's what his feasibility study is gonna be looking at.
Okay.
What's the life expectancy of our turtle?
The turtles are looking pretty good now. Who's that?
Linda's here.
Let Linda talk about that.
Well, let's see, what's the life of a turtle?
You know, some of them live a long time. Those Galapagos tortoises, I've heard 400 and 500 years old.
That's right.
I think we're thinking about 10 to 20 years. But we have a supply of turtles now. We didn't have a supply of turtles, so we were thinking about phasing them out. We have recently found that we have a supply of turtle meters. So we can continue to build out some of the substations that we haven't, that are still not built out, like Laird's, for example.
There's so many utilities.
There's 900 meters there that we can turn.
So many utilities now that are going to AMI that frees up a lot of turtles that they're selling now, is that not
I
right?
think that may be where some of this is coming from, but it's new. It's also new stock.
Okay.
Linda?
But the manufacturer is no longer supporting this, are they, or are they? I don't.
I believe they support it.
They do? Oh,
I
okay.
believe they support it.
Linda, for the benefit of the people that are on the other side of that screen, could you tell us what a turtle is? I mean, we're talking about turtles and.
Right. A turtle is a meter that is read through the substation power lines.
Okay, thank you. So billing, I don't see, any significant change there. Engineering distribution, I'll let John talk about that if he would like. What kinds of, and if you want to get into capital projects now, that you're welcome to.
Well, we do anticipate a somewhat of a reduction, at least from the actual, due to some changeover in staff, losing David Frog as an experienced designer. We have replaced with a lower grade position, mapping tech. The operations, materials, and supply is kind of flexible, and year to year, we do anticipate contracting for a smaller project next year than we did this year. think the only contract project, or actually that's in the substation, very few contract projects that we're going to be looking at. We're going to rely on in-house labor. So I guess we're looking at a reduction from, that estimated actual, there's something going on with the allocation for capital.
Yes, I'm sure there is.
So it's not apples and apples.
Yeah.
So basically, there's a discount of engineering labor assigned to capital that is backed out of the estimated actual, but not in the initial
Yeah.
budget.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to talk about capital projects, or?
Well, in general, I will say that there's a large backlog of O&M maintenance that is built up over the last couple of years. So the capital that we plan to, capital for next year and probably the following year is a substantial reduction, at least of what was previously budgeted. 1.8 million for both transmission, substation, and distribution engineering. We budgeted fewer projects for in-house labor to give them an opportunity to catch up on a lot of maintenance that hasn't been done, or they haven't been able to keep up with the line inspection program that we adapted a couple years ago, or 3 years ago, as part of the RP3 program. So, you want to go into individual line items for budgeting? Probably not.
No.
We just summarized them.
No, we just summarized them here.
Okay.
And basically,
All right.
you can say as much as you want about them. And we lumped a bunch of those together to kind of take up less space.
No, I understand. So First Street is an interesting project in Sequim. We're going to do procurement of materials and do the engineering next year, with a following year for construction associated with the street project for First Street. That's where we have distribution poles along the high school main route that are almost in the drive-through area. So we're going to remedy that in all likelihood if they cooperate and provide a trench. So we do it at a low cost to underground that section, depending on what they're willing, the city's willing to work with us on that. They have to provide real estate for pad facilities and to build into their contract the accommodation of materials, at least by providing a trench or giving us the opportunity to trench in a way that doesn't require substantial restoration.
They've been asking to underground that for years, so I would anticipate cooperation. But
Yeah, and from all indications, they are talking to us, and we've been coordinating on this project, and we've been postponing our overhead reconstruction project in anticipation of this, but they now have it on their calendar, and I believe it's for construction in 2017. So we're going to do the engineering and procurement of materials at the end of the year for the spring project. Most of the operations costs will be in the following year. Okay, URD replacements and
Was he looking for transmission?
I don't know. You looking for transmission, or are you?
well, no, I'm looking at URD. I mean, are we just looking at the labor?
Just the engineering and material portion.
Oh, okay, just the material portion.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, URD, so this is just materials. We're keeping URD replacements at or slightly above historic levels due to the number of payment calls we've been receiving. I know we're having about 25 a year now. And to stay on top of that and to get through this old polyethylene cable within a reasonable length of time, we need to dedicate pretty much a full-time crew and the materials necessary to do that. We anticipate as part of the, it's kind of hard to distinguish O&M and capital with poles, because new poles are automatically capital additions, but in a sense they're maintaining our pole lines, replacing poles that are approaching 50 years. That's consistent with what we've been doing the last several years. And then most of those other 15 projects are fairly small projects. And totally dependent on the availability of operations labor, whether that's going to get fully funded or not. We think it will, especially trimming back the total number of projects. Nothing else really out of the ordinary. Case servers, security cameras.
Okay,
Let's,
thanks. Why don't we take a little break?
This is a good break time.
Take about, what, 10 minutes or so?
Oh, I thought he was through.
Well, he didn't
What
talk about
happens then
transmission.
That's
is after about
Get it.
30 years in service, next year, we're looking at a substantial contract project for spanning the LWA. That should come in at substantially lower. The dollar amount here for the actuals is not including all of the monies associated with the project we did this year.
Go to 32, Dave?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that administrative thing, John, we'll have to look into that. I don't remember.
Well, I'm racking my brain. We have a contract for emergency oil response, but it's nowhere near that.
Yeah,
So
we'll have to check.
Cause it doesn't ring a bell with about 100,000.
You know, we're not above making mistakes too, so.
Okay,
So here's the transmission, capital projects.
Up the bottom.
At the bottom.
okay. Beaver Camp sub upgrade, we've been doing one substation a year. This year, we've completed Nia Bay. We're gonna do SCADA upgrade as well as a rebuild of that station. In 17, we're gonna do Forks 1 and 2, and that will complete all of our substations for major upgrades. The LWA transmission, that'll be in all likelihood a contracted project. We've got to span the LWA, replace that existing crossing. We also have to establish BIA accepted easement and rights. We're in the process of doing that now. The Highway 101 Gadeski to La Push is an in-house labor capital project. Once they finish the solid rock three-phase and transmission to distribution conversion in the spring, or the end of this year and into next year, most of the overhead cruise time is going to go into that Gadeski project. And of course, there are a number of smaller projects, pole change outs, things like that. The transmission, most of the effort's going to go into the substation upgrade at Beaver and the highway project for phase 1, Gadeski and Push.
So Beaver's at Nia Bay?
No, we completed Nia Bay
Oh, you
this year.
completed Nia Bay. Did we do SCADA out there, or you?
It's ready for SCADA as soon as we have communications.
Okay.
Beaver Camp will have SCADA because we're going to have communications. And then 17 we'll finish out with Forks 1 and 2, and then we'll have no more major substation rebuild projects except for airport, which will be the last, at least for the next 20 years.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay. Records, I think it's pretty, in fact, it's even down a little bit from last year's budget. We, in 2015, we spent a little bit of extra money, we budgeted for, but we spent a little bit more, having some contract labor come in and scan a lot of documents that were not scanned and we hadn't kept up with apparently, and so hopefully that's being cut about in half. Next year, I think we're still planning on keeping one person around to continue that project, but we've gotten a good foothold into that apparently. I don't think Steve's here, so I can't speak directly to all of that. Information technology, again, I think the only increase that you see in personnel costs would be related to probably PERS and medical insurance. There were no new employees added. Utility services, Fred, anything big or unusual that you want to talk about there?
No, other than we have received our new CPA. We'll be presenting that to the board next week. Our targets are 40% lower than they have been the last 2 years.
Okay, it's because it's on a business plan, or?
It's because there are, market conditions with low prices just have less conservation that's economically feasible to achieve.
Say that again. Low prices?
Low prices for energy.
Okay.
And that's the alternative
Oh, I
to
see what you're saying.
energy
Okay,
conservation
okay.
to meet load growth.
Okay.
Loads are flat, as we talked about earlier, so
Okay,
all
okay.
those things lead to a lower target for
Okay.
conservation.
Well, good. Maybe we can reduce those numbers in
We
the
should.
projections.
Yep.
Okay. Purchase power?
Well, this is, forecast based on normal weather, based on Bonneville's rates that went into effect in October of this year. And, the rest of it is just other related costs that are, just about flat. Our WAPAG and I think PPC is in another budget, but Terry Mundorf and so forth is the legal consultant.
So what was the rate increase in October for Bonneville?
For us, it was, I think, a little under 7%.
Oh, wasn't it 5.7 or did it come through higher than? I thought it was 5.7.
Okay, yeah, so maybe a little under 6.
Transmission was 6.9 something?
Yeah,
Yeah,
transmission
transmission was a little higher.
Yeah. But transmission makes up what, about?
It's about 2
5
million out of the
Yeah,
24
so about 10% of the,
Right.
a little over 10%, a little less than 10%. Power resources, which I would assume that's basically your department.
Right, so that's got myself, I think it's got half of Tyler's time. And I think there was another position in there. I don't know if it's still in there or not.
Let me think for a second.
I think so.
Power analyst.
I think we left him in that.
Yeah, I think we left that position.
That position.
Okay, thank you, Whoops. Fiber, you can talk to that, I think that's
Okay.
pretty flat, in fact, yeah.
Right, that gets allocation from operations, some of my time, some of IT's time. It also reflects just miscellaneous equipment that's needed to replace the telecommunications network. And you probably recall, we decided some years ago that we weren't gonna actively pursue the wholesale telecommunications business, so we really focused on, doing projects for John in terms of telecommunications for substations and SCADA. Some of the capital work is driven by NOAANET asking us to build for a customer, in which
Yeah.
case we get paid for that bill.
Line, it's like line extension.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
No assessment from on that, and
No more assessment from NOAANET.
okay, operations, Dennis, you can talk as much as you want. Maybe even a little bit more than you want.
well, you better order out for lunch.
That actually on the personnel costs, we're not adding any new employees.
No, that would probably be, a lot of it's related to medical costs.
Yeah.
And built in the like was mentioned before, the 3%, best guess at the
Right.
cost of the contract.
I think that's
increase,
what
so-
we used, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, and operations, material supplies down a little bit. The contractual services down a little bit. There's not a whole lot of increase in any of the areas. The contractual services up a little bit. But basically, why we didn't increase a whole lot. You see the structures and improvements. Last year was the 13 million. That's for the 3 buildings that we're working on. I don't see it here, but there was 1.8 million for the forks.
Yeah, I don't think we put that in there. I don't know that that was,
I had it in there. But
you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
But anyway, it.
oh, okay. We'll check on that. Sorry.
I'll let you call Bill and tell him when it was taken.
No,
They said to make
Maybe it's
mistakes,
on the,
Dave.
is it on the
No, I'm the
capital?
first one to admit it. That's
Yeah,
right.
it should
Is there a capital slide? Or
That probably is.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it still should be there.
Yeah.
There was a trucks.
Yeah, the trucks
I didn't
aren't
see
here.
forks in it though.
Yeah, the capital's not here.
No. Yeah.
No.
Well, you got
Oh, yeah, it is.
transportation.
Transportation equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's basically the same. That this year we have two bigger trucks, the digger derrick and a bucket truck, and then a replacement for the water department. But that pretty much stayed the same. So, meters is, yeah, that it really wasn't 50,000 last year.
No, we spent 119 or almost 120.
Yeah,
It's like-
and actually it was 200,000. So we're doing really well on what we actually for real budgeted. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the transformers, we're down on those. We're just, with the lack of the customer inquiries increasing there, we went ahead and reduced it based on what we had spent last year. It wasn't near that. That's what the meters, like, again, that's accounting for the increase possibly of the radio red meters. And we have going to have a meeting here in the very near future to try to firm up the plan, what we're gonna do going forward as far as our metering.
Okay. You wanna go to the capital stuff now and talk
Yeah,
about it?
Yeah, it does, yeah, there's not much there.
Well, let's see, is there anything here? This is,
No.
that's IT
No.
stuff. Okay, there's bucket truck, digger derrick, and that's, so that, got that stuff there.
Yeah, that's the replacing the bucket trucks, the one in Port Angeles, digger derrick. That one, when it's replaced, will go out to Forks. We have 2 crews out in Forks right now, and we're trying to get them set up so it's a little more efficient for them to be able to do more overhead work. Initially, that crew was set up out there to do a lot of underground work, but that's tapered off now. And so we're going to kind of, well, I'm not gonna say we're giving them hand-me-downs, but we're taking, a truck that,
Please don't say that.
no, it's not a hand-me-down. Going into the second line, but that crew that will be using that truck will be working more distribution work as opposed to the transmission. The other thing, the projects, those are engineering projects that they have asked the operations people to work on. And so that would be the cost, primarily the labor to do that.
Labor cost.
Yeah, and the 41 projects, that's, like John said, they're not very big projects for the most part. There's one thing, the maintenance, was mentioned, we're going to try to do more system maintenance. We've had that inspection program, John kind of mentioned it, for several years now. We have quite a stack of maintenance items that we need to start working on, so we're hoping and anticipating our crews this year we'll have a little more time to work on some of those small projects like that.
The Piedmont solar deal, what's that all about?
That's, we're going to be removing that transmission line that we stopped using several years ago. And we're pushing right up against the timeline to where we need to get it removed. And so we're going to make sure we get that done next year. Seems like it's we kind of have worked on other projects and so forth, but it's time to get it removed.
Is the conductor still there, or some of it's still there?
Yes.
Yeah.
The conductor's there through the whole length. Of course, some structures are down. But it's basically, we're obligated, since we're no longer using that as a supply, that under the terms of the right-of-way, we have to remove. And as Dennis mentioned, that's one project that typically has been postponed, but we're now up against the wall, and we're obligated to remove it. And some of that's going to be our labor, and there might be a little contract element to that too. It's not fully determined yet.
No salvage value to it?
Well, there's some, but not nearly the cost of the removal. We have to, in many cases, we can't saw them down at the ground line. They have to hold that big jack up.
Not all of them, I hope.
Well, hopefully not, but they basically, they will not let us go and saw it down at the ground line and let it lay, because that becomes a hazard for anybody hiking that area and in the future. But that tends to rot out after you cut it to the ground level. So a lot of those poles are going to be jacked out. All the conductor removed.
Have you tried to find anybody that's interested in salvaging it?
We're going to do that. We haven't issued any kind of contract. We can talk to several people around the county who might be interested, but they're still going to charge us for the removal, because the accessibility is a nightmare along about half of that one.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, now we can move on to water. We are going to talk about water in general. I put together a projection like you have there for electric, but I don't want to use it right now because we're in the process of getting a water cost of service study done, and we're kind of working with the consultant on that to hone those numbers in, and I didn't want to present some erroneous numbers, so I think probably by the time we come back for our next go around on budget and start talking about rates, we'll have that available. So again, the water system, the costs recovered through rates, purchased water, personnel costs, capital additions and improvements, materials and supplies, taxes, debt service, and conservation. You know, the debt service with the water system is a little bit more of a challenge than it is with electric, because electric, we have bonds which, you know, you amortize over the life of the bond. The debt service with water, because of the fact that the types of loans that you get, you kind of draw on as you go, and so that amortization schedule changes from year to year, and so depending on how much you're drawing down on those loans. How much, Tom, as you recall, how much more do we have on those drinking water loans that is still out there to get?
We have about 2 million, 2.5 somewhere in there.
2.5 million, okay. Again, our challenges are stable rates, which is more difficult for water because of the size of the systems and the diversity of the systems, which is one of the issues that we're in the process of dealing with respect to the cost of service. Capital financing limitations, we can't go out and borrow money as easily as the electric system can. And then we don't have a specific policy or specific target, but we would like to be able to maintain our reserves at about 2 million. Don't know how well we're doing with that at this moment. I don't think too well, but we need to move in that direction. Thanks, John. Whoops, I don't know if that's.
Trying to help Ted out here.
You can pull the.
If it's up higher, you gotta stand on top of it, John.
Yeah, I think there's a pole line thing.
That'll work. Don't pull it too hard.
Got one more week to go.
That's right. Chairs are falling apart, that money too.
There you go. Thank you. Not sure what that bright thing out there is, but.
You're right. There goes more revenue, huh?
Yeah. And again, we don't have the type of bond covenants in water, but you know, it is a sound business practice to try to maintain a good debt service ratio. So these again, same basic format where we show the proposed 2016 budget, then the 2015 budget, the change from one budget year to the next, and then the estimated actual. Had our estimated actual get to be exactly the same, is that right?
Yes, it is. Actually, the weather's been good for
Oh,
water.
it's not exactly the same, it's
It's
just,
very
yeah,
close.
it is pretty close, yeah. Wow, unbelievable.
Good.
Whoever did that budget. I don't think I can take credit for
Whoever
that.
it is,
Well,
that's-
maybe I can. And then the other, I think that's the number that you gave us, 275,000 for loan proceeds for 2016, Tom, is that correct?
Right.
Yeah, that's partly 2012,
Right.
2012 drinking water loan, and then an additional loan for 100,000.
Right, okay, thank you. So, water expenditures. Purchase water, we anticipate being approximately the same. Personnel costs up a bit. I would guess that a good portion of that is insurance related and PERS related, but I'm not 100% sure. Were there any additional people? No additional people, just,
Nope.
okay. Operations and contractual services, that's kind of misleading because a good portion of that in 2015 is capital, it gets reallocated as capital expenses. So that's not.
It's not true.
It's not a good.
operations.
It's not a good thing to look at the change from one year to the next. And again, that good portion of that capital is included in that total budget down there at the bottom. So we're not cutting the budget really by 5 million. We're just doing less in capital
Right.
projects. Their debt service, of course, is going up because we did get a significant amount of new money for the Fairview projects. Is that right, Tom?
That's right.
Okay, you need to say something.
Well, the 3.7 $1 million change, that, that was all the construction on the 2 new well sites that was performed last year.
Right.
So we're not gonna do that this year.
Right, exactly, yeah. Okay.
These are low interest loans.
Right.
Yeah, they're usually a half to 1%, aren't they, something like that?
Yeah, and with some principal forgiveness.
Yeah, some of it is actually, in fact, part of it this past year was considered to be grants.
Yeah, 40%.
40% of
Oh,
those
really?
grants,
Yeah.
yeah, which is good. They don't have to pay it back,
Like
no
that.
interest. It's great, yeah.
Just comes out of a different pocket.
Yeah.
But not our pocket.
That's right.
Well, some of it is coming out of our pocket. Okay, so unless there's anything else that you have questions about or you guys want to expand on, capital budget for the year. Tom, do you want to talk about any of these or?
Sure, Carlsberg Booster Pump Station, that's actually for Department of Health compliance on some low pressure zones near our Frost Road reservoirs. So we need to have a booster station there in order to continue to add more connections to the system. Deer Park Reservoir renovation, we're just starting that tomorrow to repaint the reservoir. And
So we up at the treatment plant now?
Yeah.
We're operating from the treatment plant?
yes, that's up and running.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Deer Park Road, pumping phase 2, that's just finishing up the work that we started this year during the drought emergency.
Are we gonna automate that then, Tom?
Yeah, it's all run by manual now, and having guys running around pushing buttons on the controllers. So we just get SCADA in there, have that control pumps. Olympic Highway upgrade, now that we have a lot more water from the 2 new wells, we need a bigger pipe to put it in and transmit it. Also, upgrade of some of our pressure regulation vaults to allow us to pump more water, yet not have the high pressure in the system, lower the system. And then general water main replacement, that's embarking upon more of a preventive maintenance program, asset management. So we're putting in approximately $1,000 a year for a more methodical approach instead of just repairing when we have emergency main breaks.
Nothing to do with Fairview.
Correct.
Just
That's in general.
maintenance.
Right.
And that's it, okay. Sewer operations, not much noise going on there. I don't think there's any substantial changes, probably any increase in revenues is, I don't know if we even have any additional customers, I don't think so. That's basically rate increases.
No capital projects, right?
No capital projects, personnel costs basically the same. In fact, the budget is so far exactly the same. I would assume that we probably would raise our personnel costs a little bit, just due to the cost of living.
Is that usually about a half a man, is that what that is? Or?
Yeah, if even that, really.
I bet he wouldn't like you calling him that.
We've got a lot worse.
So, I think that is it. Any questions, comments, input?
This is drought 1, 2,
This is the, you know, we've been back and forth with the department people, and so, you know, we're pretty close. We'll make some adjustments due to some things that we found, but for the most part, we're pretty close at this point. Now our big challenge becomes figuring out a way to squeeze the revenue that we need out of the, not squeeze it, I don't mean good, it sounded good. I'm talking in terms, remember, I'm an accountant, so squeeze is a technical term in accounting. Basically figure a way to design our rates to get the maximum.
He's looking for weasel words.
Those
drug in there.
The maximum revenue for the lowest rate increase.
Good. That's good.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we haven't scheduled budget hearings yet. But,
I think Nicole has them on the calendar. I just
Oh, okay.
don't think we've
It's all scheduled.
we've advertised
We
them.
have
We've had them on.
one meeting left in this room
yeah.
next
Yeah.
week, and then you'll be meeting over at the new building.
Okay.
And I'd have to ask Nicole, but I think the first week or so of December is when we were planning on doing our
First or
road
second.
show. First or second week
Yeah.
of December, we were planning.
Matter of fact, there's only 2 meetings in December, if I
Right.
recall right.
Right,
Just the first 2, and then the next 2 weeks are off.
yeah.
So we'll have all the budget, any increase or decrease, strategic plan. I think we're doing rates and, what's that called, rates and forecast.
Oh, we'll do the charges, the
Charges, yeah.
basic, the different charges. that-
So we'll do all that.
First week of December.
Yeah,
Okay.
but we will, the week or so, or a week or 2 prior to that, we will have some rate hearings in. I would assume we're gonna be going to the east or the west side for at least one we've done in the past, and probably one here. Well, not one here, one in Carlsberg, and I don't know if we've decided if we're gonna do another one in Squim, or if we're just gonna do Carlsberg. I think that's it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that probably makes sense.
We
Okay.
have a lot going on with the new move. We've got a new employee handbook that'll be coming out in the next few months. So we'll be presenting a lot to you. So there's kind of exciting times.
Do we have a committee, for lack of a better word, or somebody that's looking in our healthcare options and costs in management?
There is a healthcare committee that's derived of union employees and staff employees that hasn't been real active in the last couple of years. So I would imagine them and maybe some from management if we start evaluating stuff next year.
That appears to be one of the major costs ahead of us, and
We're also bringing in a consultant on that. The one that Lewis is probably the only utility that went ahead and did some things with the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. The others pretty much just put, like I was saying, the year opener into all the contracts. So the one who's doing it for Lewis, I've asked Jamie to get with him, and we'll get him on board, because he's gone through it already, and to see where we want to go. I'm leaning more toward trying to go to year openers, but I would like to know what the situation is before we do that. I don't want to jump on making a whole lot of changes, and then if they pull back on it, we're kind of stuck with what we did.
Yeah, well, yeah.
well, that's just the one aspect of it, that's, and as old as our relationship with the union. The other part of it is the compliance requirements from the federal level, if you will, or state level, that probably looked at. These PPO discounts, you look, when you get your statement, you think how wonderful it is. That guy gives me, but what if you don't qualify for the PPO discount? People really pay those prices?
We actually pay, for the
The employee pays more if they choose not to go to a
Well,
PPO.
you know, let's say, costs you, $40 to go with a chiropractor. And if you're a preferred, and he's a preferred provider, so the insurance company gets to pay him $25 for doing what somebody else gets to pay $40.
That's the way PPOs work. They don't expect to get the full dollars that they bill you, only if you don't have PPO.
But it's pretty, it says pretty wide coverage.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, even talking to employees about encouraging, you know, some doctors, either a contract might lapse on PPO, taking them out of the preferred provider network. So we always try to remind employees to be mindful of seeing that, because the employee's also gonna pay more if they go to, doctors that are out of the network. So there's a cost savings for the plan and for the employee if they either kind of research or encourage their provider to be in the network.
And I understand that, and I think that's wonderful. I just don't understand why somebody pays almost twice as much for the same thing just because they're special.
Yeah, because they're joining the PPO.
Their insurance.
Wow.
That's the way insurance works.
Yeah.
And you're gonna try and figure out a way to get even better PPOs, right?
Mm-hmm,
That's
yeah.
part of this whole Cadillac provision type thing.
Yeah, we definitely are trying to lower our costs. That will in turn keep us from hitting that excise tax. And the longer we can push that out, the better, more savings to
Have you
everyone.
figured out yet exactly what you gotta meet?
They have a number, it will change every year, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. What we're waiting for some feedback is even like our VIVA plans. The guidance we have right now is that those are included in the calculation. So like Doug mentioned, Lewis, they're actually stopping their VIVA contributions at some point to help lower and bring down their risk from hitting that excise tax. So that's part of the evaluation, but everything changes every 6 months with the healthcare reform.
Like you said, the affordability is more expensive.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not surprised.
Okay. well,
Okay, we're done?
that's it.
Great job, Dave.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good.